Well, welcome to Psych Perspectives, giofvcks, and we're going to discuss a couple of things. One of the things that I really wanted to discuss was the SAVE Act and how it would basically disfranchise millions of actual citizens in the USA. Now, information will always be in the description box below. Um, this first half of it is definitely going to be particularly focused on the AmericanProgress.org. Wonderful organization. They always have a lot of good information, but then I also will include additional references for backing up what I'm talking about. So, the SAFE Act, SAVE Act. The Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act has been reintroduced by the U.S. House of Representatives. This legislation would require all Americans to prove their citizenship status by presenting documentation in person. Now, when you say in person, this again creates a dilemma for a lot of people, for millions of people in this country. Number one, if somebody is disabled, they have a hard time with mobility. They have a hard time walking, they're in a wheelchair, they're on crutches, they have multiple sclerosis, they have a disability. How are they going to be showing up in person with the proper documentation in order to prove that they're a citizen? Also, the other aspect of this is say you're a college student. Typically, if you go away for college, you're not going to be living in the same city, county, let alone state that you are registered to vote in because you went to college, especially if you're the one that decided to go away to college. So, how are they going to come vote in person for one day? So, you're going to fly out of the state, come back home for one day to vote? Okay. Those are just two examples of how this is going to be problematic for a lot of people. Okay, in person when registering to vote or updating their voter registration information. Specifically, the legislation will require the vast majority of Americans to rely on passports or birth certificates to prove their citizenship. So, are we going to start allowing the US passports to be free then? Because how are you going to make something a requirement and then expect people to pay for it? Because again, it's like renewing your passport is like $125-$130. If you're getting a new one, it's like $180. So it's like, again, in the times that we're living in where people are literally struggling to make ends meet, how are you going to be budgeting another basically $200 um, to get a passport? Okay, just saying. While this may sound easy for many Americans, the reality is more than 140 million American citizens do not possess a passport. I got my passport in 2017, and then I renewed it because updates. Catch, catch the sarcasm. Anyway, um, I renewed it in 2022, and typically your U.S. passport lasts for 10 years. Also, the reality is as many as 69 million women who have taken their spouse's last name do not have birth certificates matching their legal name. So, not only is this a direct attack towards people living with disabilities, the time constraints, people having the access to come back home to get all of those documents together, it's also very much misogynistic. Okay, because again, well, to me, the whole taking somebody's last name in general is misogynistic because you're still basically saying that your wife is property. That's basically what that's about. But okay, so now you're targeting 69 million women because obviously, if you get married and you decide to take your husband's last name, which to me, you shouldn't be doing that in the first place, and if you're going to have each other's last name, have it hyphenated, but you're not property. Anyways, obviously, if you take your husband's last name, it's not going to be the same last name on your birth certificate. So, again, it's about banning women from voting. Also, this will definitely make more people second guess getting married because literally you're telling women if they get married and they change their last name to their husband's, they're not going to be able to vote. So why would anybody want to get married at that point? Honestly, I don't get why you're getting married anyways. With today's dating scene, good luck on finding a decent partner. But that's a whole nother video. Anyways, so that is an issue there, okay? Documentation would need to be presented in person. The legislation would, in practice, prevent Americans from being able to register to vote by mail, end voter registration drives nationwide, and eliminate online voter registration overnight, a service 42 states rely on. Michigan, I'm in the state of Michigan, the Blue Lake State, the Great Lake State, and we have those rights currently. We fought for those rights. If you all remember in Michigan in 2018, we literally passed some of the most progressive ballot initiatives in history. And now they want to take away the ballot initiatives that Michiganders voted for. So much for democracy. Also, again, people who are sick, who are elderly, who are disabled, they wouldn't be able to do absentee ballots anymore. You know, um, same day voter registration. Uh, it's just so many things. And again, it's voter suppression. They don't want people to be able to have the right to vote because when people have those rights, um, the people such as Trump, Elon, and Jeff Bezos, and so many other to name, are not going to be able to do everything that they want to do when people are aware and they can vote against their oppression. We've been trying to tell y'all this for years. And I used to get so upset when I would see people say, voting doesn't change anything, voting doesn't matter. Right. If it doesn't change anything, then why in the hell are you sitting up here worrying about your job being laid off? Oh, that's right. Because voting does change things. See, when you decided November 5th, right, for Trump and JD Vance to be the president and vice president, oh, it changed a lot of things, did it not? Now you're sitting up here worrying about your Section 8, your housing choice voucher, your Pell Grants, the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for your HUD housing choice vouchers, your EBT, your food stamps, Health and Human Services. Yeah, a lot of things is changing because people thought voting didn't change anything and voting didn't matter. And again, if it doesn't matter, why are they constantly coming up with every single backdoor way through legislation at the federal and state level to take away that right? But it doesn't matter. Okay, I'm just saying it's time for us to start, putting on our critical thinking caps and really thinking here, okay? Again, Americans would need to appear in person with original documentation to even simply update their voter registration information. For example, a change of address or a change in your political party affiliation. These impact alone would set voter registration sophistication and technology back decades and would be unworkable for millions of Americans, including, this is what's going to hit you, including more than 60 million Americans who live in rural areas, which these are the very same 60 million Americans, not all of them, but these are the very same people who voted for Trump, who are now about to lose their voting right if the SAVE Act, as it's written currently, is enacted. Mind blown, right? Again, additionally, driver's license, including real IDs, as well as military or tribal IDs, would not be sufficient forms of documentation to prove citizenship under this current legislation in the SAVE Act. So then, what is the point of you having state IDs, real IDs, driver license, military IDs, tribal IDs, if none of that matters? Because if you don't have a US passport or a birth certificate and your name doesn't match what's on there, you can't vote under the SAVE Act. Again, this is going to be detrimental for most of us or somebody that you know. Again, most of us. The SAVE Act is, again, it is a disastrous legislation. It's going to alter the way every American citizen is able to register to vote. It disregards the resources available to Americans as well as the reality of American women's lives, which again, the misogyny is on a whole nother level. This is what happens when you live in a patriarchal, toxic masculinity, white supremacist country. I'm just going to call a thing a thing. Uh, Not to mention, millions of Americans, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, progressive, degressive, anyways, independent, we could all be disenfranchised regardless of your political affiliation, your political party. We could all become disenfranchised because of that. Um, and the current leadership in the U.S. House of Representatives have declared the passing the legislation is one of their top priorities for the 119th Congress. And I think it's really important to highlight that this is what the Republican Party is pushing. Now, this isn't to say the Democrats are off the hook, because I'm just going to be honest. They need to have a backbone and actually stand up for what they claim to believe in. Actually stand up for the constituents you claim to support instead of sitting up here going along with the flow and throwing your constituents under the bus every time you get a chance to please the Republican Party. What do they call, what do they say? Grow some balls. That's what they say. Anyways, the federal law already clearly states that it is illegal for non-US citizens to register to vote or cast a ballot in federal elections. It's an existing crime that is punishable by up to 5 years in prison. Election officials already use state and federal data, including citizenship data from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the Social Security Administration, to verify an individual's eligibility to cast a ballot. We already do that currently. The SAVE Act would do is invert the responsibility to verify a person's eligibility and citizenship status from election officials and the government onto American citizens, which also is another problem because I hate to break it to you, but there's quite a bit of, racist, xenophobic American citizens who would literally use their racism to justify barring another American citizen from being able to register to vote or cast a ballot because they don't think you're a citizen based off of their racism and bigotry. So that is another problem there, okay? Um, as required by federal law, Americans must provide either the last 4 digits of their social security number or their driver's license number on a voter registration application in order to provide election officials with the necessary information to verify their identity and voting eligibility. The SAVE Act seeks to upend this process and turn a relatively well-oiled system where officials are tasked with the work of verification, as stated before, and make every single American citizen put in the work, time, and resources to exercise their constitutional right to vote and convince the government that they are eligible. And then on top of that, you're going to have people who are actual American citizens be told that they're not an American citizen all of a sudden under this legislation if it is enacted currently the way it is written out. And again, half of Americans do not have U.S. passports. Again, classism is something that has to be brought up here because I hate to break it to you, but most of us are poor, or working class. Some of us are middle class. It used to be more of us that were middle class, but thanks to corporations becoming people and corporations and the rich and the wealthy pretty much buying elections and buying, entire political platforms, you don't really have that much workers' rights in middle class. Again, it takes money to get a US passport, okay? So, according to statements and data released by the US Department of State, approximately only half of American citizens possess a passport. This means half of all American citizens would not be able to provide one of the primary acceptable forms of documentation that would be required to register to vote under the SAVE Act currently, as it's written. So, again, half of us would not be able to vote. And then we already know around 69 million women wouldn't be able to vote. And we know a lot of disabled people, a lot of people that, travel or they're college students for whatever reason, they're at work, whatever, wouldn't be able to vote. Approximately 146 million American citizens do not possess a passport. To put that number into perspective, 153 million Americans cast a ballot in the 2024 presidential general election, November 5th, 2024. So that would literally mean that only 7 million Americans would likely be able to be eligible to vote if that was to happen because most people don't have it. And then 146 million Americans don't have a US passport. 153 million Americans voted November 5th, 2024. Do you see the problem? Okay? Like we are literally so, and then if you go to americanprogress.org, again, the information is in the description box below. They have a figure one, only half of American citizens have passport, and it's literally a picture of the country. And you can literally highlight each state to kind of see the percentage or the amount of people in that state that have a US passport. So in my area, Michigan, only 39.7% of Michiganders have a valid passport, which means 5.8 million Michiganders do not have a valid passport. Again, classism is real. And it's crazy too because when you look at the outlook of figure one and the states, you can literally see how classism shapes everything. Because ironically enough, the East Coast and West Coast states typically are going to have a higher percentage. They also typically earn significantly more income. Not to say that there aren't poor, working class, lower income people on the East Coast or the West Coast, but you get my gist here. Now, for example, on the West Coast in California, 71.8% of California citizens have a valid passport. However, 9.6 million plus Californians don't have a valid US passport. Okay, let's see here. If we go to New York, 71.1% of New York citizens have a US passport. However, 5.1 million plus New York citizens do not have a valid passport. We get to Florida. 59.9% have a Floridians have a valid passport. However, 8.1 million Floridians do not have a valid passport. Okay? And then once you start getting into like what I would call the deep south, like Alabama, only 27.7% have a passport. Um, Mississippi, only 22.1% have a US passport. Louisiana, only 30.4% have a US passport. Okay. Tennessee, 35.4%. South Carolina, 37.7%. Kentucky, 29%. Missouri, 37.2%. Oklahoma, 33.1%. Okay. I'm purposely Arkansas, 28.4%. Now, when you get to Texas, it's finally over 50%. 54.8% of Texans have a U.S. valid passport, but 12.3 million plus Texans do not. So you can see how this is going to be detrimental for a lot of reasons. It's really crazy. Also, kind of going back to what I kind of highlighted, just kind of going over the figure one photo on the website. Americans who have less education as well as lower incomes are far less likely to have a passport than Americans with higher levels of education or higher income levels. Again, it's a class issue as well. Okay. And one of the many reasons why I have a US passport is because I went to college. I have a master's degree in social sciences, which is why I'm always talking about these issues. Okay, again, this isn't to say that lower income people or people with less education don't have US passports, but the likelihood of them having one, as I literally just demonstrated in the AmericanProgress.org has eloquently put together additional information and data also demonstrating the likelihood of them having one is slim to none. Literally. So, um, so again, among Americans whose highest level of education is a high school degree or less, approximately only 1 in 4 have a valid passport. Americans with a household income below $50,000 a year, only 1 in 5 have a valid passport. So the policies in the SAVE Act are, like I said, it's a class issue. It's a socioeconomic issue. It's going to disproportionately harm the voting rights of working class and lower income Americans. So it's not just what's going to happen to one group, it's multiple identities being targeted and disenfranchised. Okay, the vast majority of married women cannot present a valid birth certificate. Like I stated earlier, if you got married and you changed your name to your husband's last name, which again I don't recommend, but okay, you obviously are not going to have your husband's last name on your fucking birth certificate. Okay, like that's something to think about. All right. The Pew Research Center found that 79% of American women married to men have taken their spouse's name. When women who have hyphenated their surname are also accounted for, 84% of American women have changed their surname. Again, you're not property. A lot of this is built out of misogyny. You can argue all day that it's about tradition, it's about religion, it's about ownership. Because literally, when you look at the institution of marriage, it's really about ownership, property, land, money, wealth. I'm just going to be honest. The idea of romantic love is relatively new, okay? Because if we go back 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, It wasn't about you liking the person, loving the person, having a romantic partner. It was about that man is rich. My daughter is beautiful. She can marry him or he can marry my daughter. She's going to become rich by marrying the rich guy. That's really what it was. It's about survival, money, property, control. That's a whole nother video, though. We'll get to it. Nationwide, approximately 69 million women at this time could not use their birth certificate to prove their identity or citizenship status under the SAVE Act. 5% of married men, and think about it once again, how come men, only 5%, have also changed their surname? Again, if it's not about control, power, it's not misogynistic, then how come more men aren't hyphenating their names when they get married? How come more men aren't changing their entire last name to their wife's last name, since it's not about misogyny, it's not about control, it's not about power? A lot of them can't give you an answer, can they? Because they're misogynistic. But okay. Anyways, so that would mean approximately 4 million men nationwide would also not be able to present an acceptable birth certificate under the SAVE Act to prove their U.S. citizenship. But you can see the gross misogyny here. You got 69 million women who could potentially lose their right to vote and their citizenship to the 4 million men. All of this is about controlling women, controlling poor people, working class people, lower income people, people with disabilities, disenfranchised communities. Pay attention. All right. So, as many as 69 million Americans lack or 69 American women lack access to valid birth certificates. So in my state, that would mean about 2.2 million women, Michiganian women, do not have birth certificates that match their current legal name. So I just want to throw that out there, you know. Also, the Pew Research, also that survey found that two groups of women most likely to take their spouse's name were conservative Republican women and Republican leaning women, while the two least likely groups were liberal Democratic women and Democratic leaning women. I wonder why. Because one group understands that misogyny is about power and control. Okay? I'm just going to call a thing a thing, you know? So, again, I really, 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 really urge people to become more aware of what's going on in your area, your local area, your state, and at the federal level. And if you want to, and I highly recommend, I highly suggest you also start caring about what's going on globally around you because shit has gotten very real. And you're going to need to speak up. You're going to need to fight back. You need to be calling your elected officials, your U.S. representatives, which would mean you need to be reaching out to your congressmen, your congresswomen, your congressperson, okay? Your U.S. your U.S. House representatives, your U.S. Congress folks, you need to be reaching out to them and voicing your concerns about what's going on, especially as it pertains to the SAVE Act and how that's going to disenfranchise millions of American citizens. It's going to take away our rights to vote. It's also going to take away our citizenship. So when people say politics aren't important or they downplay everything, or, you know, I'm just not into politics, well, guess what? Politics is very much into you. More information will be in the description box below. We got to fight back, y'all.